afternoon, and welcome to the latest edition of Reasonable Faith Monthly Director's Call. My name is John. I have been your host. I hail from Southern Colorado, Colorado Springs, where my specializations usually revolve around analytics and how ethics applies to business and around race theory. And for each month of the year, you guys have seen Charles join me. Charles is on the call. And we have had the privilege, Charles is the regional director, so he oversees all the Western United States. And we have walked you guys through topic after topic as outlined in the Blackwell's Companion to Natural Theology. And today's guest is no different. Professor Kai-man Kwan is here with us today to talk about religious experience. I am very, very excited. Professor Kwan is a Chinese Christian philosopher at Hong Kong Baptist University, and he's the current director of the Center for Sino-Christian Studies. So Professor Kwan has a PowerPoint he's going to share with us, and then the floor is all his. So please take it away, Professor Kwan.
Yeah. Okay, can I start now?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay. Well, hello, John and Charles. Or maybe any other person listening in the future. Now, thanks for your invitation to give me a chance to explain my argument from religious experience in the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology, and that is chapter 9 of that book. Now, the argument from religious experience, let us call it ARE in short. Next one. Now, by religious experience, I mean an experience which the subject takes to be an experience of God or some supernatural being, maybe Buddha or a ghost or other supernatural beings. Now, such an experience is veridical or truthful if what the subject took to be the object of his experience actually existed, was present, and caused him to have that experience in an appropriate way. Now, so my definition of religious experience does not assume it to be a veridical. I think we decide what is a religious experience or what is not entirely from what we can say a phenomenological account of the experience. That is, what is the content of that experience as it appears to the subject. Now, but we know that experiences can be delusory, can be hallucinations. Now, so we also need to define the term that veridical. Veridical is experience is veridical if the content, roughly speaking, conforms to the reality, and the experience itself is caused, at least partially, by that object of the experience. Now, so the question is whether religious experiences are in general or whether they're entirely. The question is whether religious experiences are entirely delusory or whether at least some of them are veridical. Now, if some of them are veridical, the implication is that the content of that experience is truthful, then it means that some kind of supernatural being or reality exists. That may be God. Now, so in this ARE, my major focus is on the experiences of God, or sometimes we call it theistic experiences. Next one. Now, the argument from religious experience in the 20th century. Now, in the past, in the philosophy of religion, people usually think that the major arguments for God or the major arguments of natural theology are the cosmological argument, the design argument, and the ontological argument. Now, some people appeal to religious experiences as a subjective ground for faith, but I think up to the mid 20th century, most mainstream philosophers would dismiss religious experiences as on the subjective side, and we cannot regard religious experiences as some kind of evidence for the existence of God. Now, so in this way, there is no argument from religious experience to the existence of God. Now, but in fact, for a long time, some philosophers do regard religious experiences as evidence for God, but it is not accepted in the mainstream philosophy. Now, but I think the situation changes due to the efforts of an Oxford philosopher, Richard Swinburne, as well as another American philosopher, William Austin. The next slide. Now, I think the important point is that in the past, the philosophers usually raise standard objections to the argument from religious experience. They say that, oh, you just have the experiences. There's no guarantee that the experiences themselves conform to reality, because we all know that some experiences are delusory. So you need to prove that your experiences are not delusory before we can take them as evidence. Okay, now, but then how to prove the religious experiences are veridical? So you need some other arguments. So they will say that religious experiences may be veridical or maybe not, but you cannot use them as independent evidence for God. Now, but this kind of position seems to assume that we need to doubt our experiences from the beginning, and then we need to produce some other evidence to prove that our experiences are okay, are truthful, are veridical. Now, but as the professor in Oxford University, Richard Swinburne, he is one of the most famous philosophers of religion in contemporary world. I think he points out that if you apply this kind of principle to experiences, that is, you require a proof of the veridicality before you trust them, then you cannot have any starting point, because the doubt can be extended one step and then another step, and then again and again to no end. Okay. Now, so in the, I think near the end of 1970s, in the last century, analytic philosophers produced increasingly sophisticated defense of religious experiences, and Swinburne defended religious experiences while his principle of credulity in the existence of God in 1979. And then later on, William Austin has written a book called Perceiving God. He has also defended in a very detailed way some kind of similar epistemology, which gives some of what we call the prima facie trust to religious experiences, as well as to our other kinds of experiences. For example, sense experiences. Next one. Now, so the principle of credulity, there is a name used by Swinburne about this principle. The principle of credulity said that it was rational to treat our experiences, including religious experience, as innocent until proven guilty. Now, that's the kind of legal principle we adopt. We do not regard suspect as immediately a criminal. Whether a suspect is really a criminal, in fact, we need to prove that in the court by producing evidence. And otherwise, we assume the suspect to be innocent until proven guilty. Now, so the idea is that the same attitude should be adopted towards our experiences, including our religious experiences. Now, because this kind of principle is a universal principle, not designed to give trust to religious experiences, but it is a basic principle that we have to adopt. Otherwise, there is no starting point for our inquiry or proof. Now, in other words, religious experiences were treated as prima facie evidence for the existence of God until there were reasons for doubting them. Next slide, please. Now, so in another formulation, the principle of credulity, sometime I call it PC. Now, later on, I have changed the name to principle of critical trust. Now, the reason is that credulity sometimes have a negative connotations. It seems to suggest that we believe too easily, too uncritically. But I don't think Swinburne used the name with this implication. So that's why I changed the name with some little modification to the principle of critical trust. Sometimes I call it PCT, the principle of critical trust. Now, one formulation of PC is that if it seems epistemically to me that X is present on the basis of experience, then probably X is present unless there are special considerations to the contrary. Now, it seems to me suggests a kind of phenomenological account of our experience. Now, for example, perhaps I am dreaming now, but it seems to me that I'm facing a computer. I am also talking to two other gentlemen through the Zoom. Okay. Now, so it seems these words suggest a kind of phenomenological content to the subject of experience. Okay. Now, this principle does recognize that our experiences can be delusory, but the point is, if you embark on a kind of Cartesian doubt, we need to doubt everything unless we have some indubitable foundation. But I think the history of modern philosophy shows that it is very difficult. Once you start the way of skepticism, there may be no way back. In fact, Descartes' own way back is not agreed upon by most philosophers. So Descartes has raised the problem, the specter of skepticism, but he does not give us any good solution to it, it seems. Now, so Swinburne turns Cartesian skepticism on its head. Descartes thinks that we need to doubt unless we have proof. But Swinburne says that that is not a common sense attitude. That's not rational. Why assume that our experiences are unverifiable, unreliable from the very beginning? We know that we can be fallible, but still we need to take our apparent experiences as a starting point. We can doubt them. It seems to me there is a computer before me. It seems to me that I'm talking to two gentlemen through the internet. If later on I suddenly seems to be awakened and I find that I'm sleeping on the bed, there's no computer, no dialogue. I was just dreaming all along. Then this state continues for an hour, for several days. Then I think I can rationally come to the conclusion that I was just now only dreaming of the computer and the dialogue on the internet. I was not actually talking to any person. I'm just dreaming. Okay. Now, but we do not assume that my current experience is dream unless we have other experiences to show that. So that's why we take our religious experiences as prima facie evidence. Now, this kind of example is using our ordinary examples. So this is not a kind of special pleading to protect religious experiences. It seems to be the common principle that we adopt towards our sense experiences, and not only sense experience, come to the point and show that in fact, in all kinds of experiences, we need to have an initial or prima facie trust. For example, I remember something. I remember my name. I remember I saw someone yesterday. I remember that I ate 2 eggs in the breakfast this morning. But how can I prove all these memories are veridical? In fact, it would be very difficult. I would also need to appeal to other experiences, so on and so forth. So if we need to prove everything, then we will be embarked on a vicious cycle and we can prove nothing. Now, so PC seems to be a fundamental principle of rationality, apart from which we cannot provide any non-circular justification of either ordinary perception or memory. Next slide. Now, so having explained the rationale of this PC, then we can apply it to religious experiences. Now we take PC as a general and fundamental principle. So it seems to me that X is present on the basis of experience, then probably X is present unless there are special considerations to the contrary. And then we have other premises. Premise A, it seems epistemically to me and many others that God is present at some time. B, there's no good reason to think either God is non-existent or not present, nor any good reason to think the experience unveridical. C, hence probably God is present. Now, so the structure of my RAE or Swinburne's RAE, in fact, my ARE is a kind of elaboration of Swinburne's ARE, extension, and then providing additional response to many kinds of objections. Now, in fact, the idea is that we should give prima facie trust to our experiences, including our sense experiences, our memories, as well as religious experiences. Because PC is a general principle, there's no reason why we should only give prima facie trust to our sense experience, but not to religious experiences. Now, if that is the case, then we also take religious experiences as prima facie evidence for God. Now, but that is not the end of the argument, because PC allows for defeaters. Defeaters are the reasons which can be suggested to show that those experiences are delusory. For example, I just woke up and find myself on the bed. That would be another experience which can be used as a defeater of my earlier experience of the computer and the internet dialogue. Okay, now so the premise B basically is the idea that there are no good defeaters for the reliability or trustworthiness of religious experiences. So given PC and premise A, and given that there are no defeaters, the conclusion follows. Now, so, okay, next one, next slide. Now, of course, the PC does not stand alone. The PC has to be used together with other epistemological principles like the following: the principle of testimony, other things being equal, others' experiences are likely to be as they report them to be. And then the principle of simplicity in a given field, we take as most likely to be true the simplest theory, which fits best with other theories of laboring fields to produce the simplest set of theories of the world. Now, I think these are also commonly accepted principles in the science and our daily life. Next one. If we take the PC alone, the principle may look unduly egocentric. However, the principle of testimony shows that Swinburne is equally emphatic on trusting others' experiences and the social dimension of knowing. Now, I think this is important. Now, because some people think that ARE can only be applied for those who have the religious experiences. And then the critics may say that, come on, you may have some strong religious experiences, but I don't. So I have no reason to take your experiences as evidence. But in fact, on many things, we don't have personal experiences. For example, I have never been to the South Pole or North Pole. I have never been to many countries, for example, India. But we all believe that there are such places like India and the South Pole. Why? We take it on the weight of the testimony of other people. And in fact, if we also apply the skeptical attitude towards our testimony, again, we will be reduced to ignorance, because most of our knowledge, in fact, do not come from our personal experiences, but are gained on the basis of testimony of other people. Now, so if we use this principle together, then that shows that even if I do not have religious experience myself, as long as there are millions of people throughout ages who have those experiences, and there are no reasons to think them entirely delusory, then that is also some evidence for those people who do not have religious experiences. So that is an argument from religious experiences and not just appeal to personal conviction. And secondly, Swinburne's approach has to be distinguished from an anything goes approach. It is recognized that initial epistemic seemings are fallible. The hope lies in our ability to shift and correct these initial data. For example, an erroneous epistemic seemings can be corrected by other epistemic seemings. However, to do this, we need some rational principles to organize our data. Principle of simplicity explains what can be counter evidence to a prima facie justified claim. The next one. We should not believe that things are as they seem to be in cases when such a belief is in conflict with the simplest theory compatible with a vast number of data obtained by supposing in a vast number of other cases that things are as they seem to be. Now, for example, if I say that I seem to see a ghost 10 feet from me, but there are 100 people around me, and they all testify to the fact that there's nothing nearby, no ghost. So I think their experiences, their seemings seem to be conflict with mine, but there are so many people who have contrary seemings, and then I recognize that this seeming of a ghost does not persist. It is transient, it is unstable, so on and so forth. Now, so the simplest theory seems to be that the others have the reliable experience and I have a very brief hallucination, or maybe I'm overinterpreting some of my sense experiences, etc. Now, so in this case, my initial experience of a so-called ghost can be overturned, can be undermined. Okay. Now, Swinburne's argument has engendered a lot of controversy. Now, since there's basically two premises, the first is that it's PC. So some critics challenge the validity of the PC, and then some other critics may accept PC, but then they argue that there are defeaters of religious experiences. Now, so my entire article is basically to defend the ARE on these two fronts. First of all, I defend the validity of PC, and second, I answer to most common alleged defeaters in this article as well as in my other articles. The next one. Now, I think just to recap my argument for the PC or my PCT, basically, I think this is an argument from avoiding skepticism. If a critic does not accept my argument, he may say, oh, I accept skepticism, but I think there's a really costly response to the ARE. So I take it that most of us do want to avoid skepticism. And this argument says, A, there are basically two approaches to our experiences, initial doubt, the Cartesian method of doubt, and initial trust. And that is the way of the PCT. Premise B, initial doubt will lead to skepticism. Initial trust can avoid skepticism. Premise C, any epistemological approach which leads to skepticism is not acceptable. Therefore, initial doubt is not acceptable, but initial trust is acceptable and more preferable. Next one. Now, we can defend a PCT when it is applied to sense experience. Now, I think I appeal to Austin's book, Perceiving God in 1991. I think he has extensively and convincingly argued for the thesis that we cannot non-circularly show the reliability of sense experience. So I won't go into details. Also, I do not have the time to do so. Now, I think the most common response to this argument is that it may be argued that our belief in the general reliability of sense experience, SE, stands for sense experience, is justified by the inductive evidence. But in gathering this inductive evidence, we cannot avoid the use of memory. So in the end, to justify ordinary perception inductively, we have to rely on the prima facie reliability of memory. We are trapped in a circle if we deny PCT status as a fundamental principle. Now, the point is that some people say, I trust my sense experiences because in the past, our sense experiences have proved to be reliable. But how do you know that? Their past reliability is now gone, not data available to you at this moment. You can only have access to this data through your memory. I remember that my sense experiences used to be reliable in the past, but then your proof depends on another data, that is your memory now. So how do you prove your memory is reliable? If you adopt the principle that for everything, we need to have an initial attitude of doubt. Next one. So I go on in my article to treat the idea whether we can prove our memory to be correct. Now, and then I argue for the application of the type PCT to memory. Our memory is fallible. So how can we distinguish real memory from false ones or even imagination? Now, some suggest reliable memory claims have intrinsic characteristics, e.g., vividness of the images associated or degree of conviction. However, after long exploration in his book on memory, von Leyden concludes, since a false memory claim is, as a rule, qualitatively indistinguishable from a correct one, no memory experience alone can make it certain that what is alleged to be remembered really occurred. Next one. Since reliance on memory is almost ubiquitous in formation of beliefs at every moment, it is extremely difficult to see how there can be non-circular justification of memory. Consider the suggestion that the general reliability of one's memory is to be established by our perceptual experiences. However, unless we take the reliability of memory for granted, it is impossible to gather sufficient empirical evidence for memory. Our experiences all happened in the past. Without basic trust in memory, what we can get from an even infallible sense experience is only a vanishing point. Okay, next one. Now, I think I don't go into details here. The basic idea is that I have tried many ways to prove memory. I have looked at many attempts by the scholars, and I have never seen one succeed. In fact, I think the trust in memory is so fundamental that I think the PCT has to be used in this instance. And then I think that shows that PCT is a fundamental and universal principle. So there's no reason why it should not be applied to religious experiences. Next one. Next one. Next one. I think for the details, I think they are all explained in my book. Now, and then I just go into briefly some fundamental objections. The argument from religious experience is usually dismissed on the basis of stock objections like the logical gap objection. We have to distinguish the experience and the subjective conviction it produces from the objectivity of the experiences, e.g. a very real hallucination or dream is a live possibility. Now, so some critics draw us to the attention that when we describe the experience using its phenomenological content, this description cannot be taken as a real description of reality. Now, so there is always a logical gap. No matter how intense the feelings of that experience, is still logically separable from the truth about reality. Now, in the past, people like Anthony Flew uses this objection effectively to counter the ARE. But I think I don't read out all the slides. I just explain briefly that, in fact, I think many people now recognize that this is a kind of double standard. Now, because if we want to prove our sense experiences, again, we cannot assume them to be reliable. And then if we use the descriptions of our sense experiences using the phenomenological content alone, then again, this kind of description is also logically separable from the truth about external reality. So the same kind of logical gap exists in all kinds of experiences, including our memory. I seem to remember in my breakfast, I ate 2 eggs. This memory itself is logically separable from the fact that I ate 2 eggs. So you can never use a deductive method to prove the truth just from the description of the experiences. So the same problems occur throughout our experiences. Now, so if you press the logical gap objection to ARD alone, then that is in fact a kind of double standard, and that should not be accepted. Next one. And then the second one is the relatedness objection. The objection says that religious experiences are heavily shaped by the conceptual framework of the experience, hence they are not useful as evidence for ontological claims. Now again, we can see that this kind of objection is a double standard. Now, because if I say that I see a computer, then of course, computer is a concept. Now, even for very simple sense experiences, like I seem to see a glass of water. Of course, a glass is a concept. A glass is supposed to be brittle. You cannot see that something is brittle. Something is brittle only if it breaks into pieces when it is dropped to the floor. Okay? Now, if you see a glass, you see something almost transparent, but how come you can be certain that it is glass? Maybe it's other kind of substance. Glass has this characteristics of brittleness, but you cannot see brittleness sheerly by sight. Now, so when you describe your experience, even in our sense experiences, we always use concepts, and these concepts include some kind of theory that something is a glass, which is brittle, and so on and so forth. And then what about water? You see some liquid or some water, but you cannot prove that it is H2O. It may be wine or maybe other things. Now, but so you can see that in fact, in all our sense experiences, when we try to describe them, when we try to use them as evidence for external reality, we always use the concept. So sense experience is also theory-laden. In fact, all these kinds of claims are substantiated by modern cognitive science and psychology of cognition, etc. And then the third objection is the privacy objection. Mystical experiences are private, like hallucinations, illusions, and dreams, and that like these non-veridical experiences, religious experience is really of no noetic significance at all. Now, in fact, again, I think this objection is based on a misunderstanding. Now, if you look at our experience in itself, every experience is private. Suppose I say I see a computer, you see your computer, or maybe we all see some images with rectangular boxes with some faces on the screen of our computers. Now, in fact, we can describe these experiences and then communicate with one another. In this sense experience is public. But if you are talking about my experience of the boxes on the screen, my experience is strictly different from yours, from Charles, from John's. Now, so in fact, every experience is private. In fact, maybe I'm blind. I just pretend to say that I see those images. Okay. Now, so all experiences are private in some sense. Now, and then religious experiences are not private in the sense that they are possessed by millions of people throughout cultures and throughout ages. And then people can describe their experiences in common languages, say a being who is very powerful, loving, etc. We have a sense of comfort, warmth, holiness, etc. Now, so if religious experiences cannot be communicated to some other people, then of course we should be unable to have this concept. So in fact, religious experiences are not private. They are shared by a huge number of people, and then they can pass along, they can communicate with one another in some language. Although there are maybe ambiguities, etc., but I do argue that religious experience is, in some sense, not pirate, in a similar sense as sense experiences are not pirate. Now, so my article goes on and on because there are many alleged defeaters to ARE. So I just use these examples to show that, in fact, these three objections have been very common in the, I think, in the past discussions of the philosophers of religion. But I find them, once we have proper understanding of the nature of experiences, the principles of critical trust, etc., then we can see that, in fact, these are not conclusive or even strong objections to the ARE. And then in my article, I go on to discuss many other objections. I don't go through all the slides, I just mentioned some of them. For example, in my article, in the Backwell Companion, I have treated, I think, in a very, I think in a detailed way, the argument from conflicting religious experiences, because people argue that, okay, PCT can be accepted, but the religious experiences are not similar to sense experiences, because in sense experiences, we do have a rough consensus over our contents and claims. But in religious experiences, there are so many kinds and they conflict with one another. So their force cancel one another. Now I treat in some details of this conflicting claims objection. And then there are also claims that we cannot individuate God in our religious experiences. There are defeaters that religious experiences can be explained by naturalistic explanations, by psychology, by Freudian psychoanalysis, so on and so forth. Now, so I just mentioned these because I think to go over all of them would take a very long time. So I think I've also replied to some other objections in other articles. And then in the recently published the Routledge Encyclopedia of Philosophy of Religion. In fact, I've written an article on religious experience, and formerly I did not deal with naturalistic explanations in all the details, but in that recent article, I especially deal with those naturalistic explanations by appealing to, say, neurophysiological explanations. I show that all those neurophysiological explanations cannot be true defeaters, because we also have neurophysiological explanations of our sense experience. We can explain our sense perception by our brain state, etc. But the existence of neurophysiological explanations is not a reason to show that our sense experience is unveridical. So again, there's a double standard to press the existence of neurophysiological explanations as a defeater for ARE. And then secondly, in the article, I show that many so-called naturalistic explanations are not in fact substantiated by really good scientific evidence. So again, this kind of defeater can also be replied to. Now, so I think I'll stop my presentation here just to remind you of the major points I use. I suppose both of you may have some knowledge about this ARE and also may have read the article already. So maybe it's more fruitful to use the dialogue to explore further this ARE. And thank you for your patience.
Oh, Professor, that was marvelous. I want to just quickly remind everyone what this is. So this is me trying to contain my excitement, by the way. I'm really excited. So
thank you.
I want to remind everyone that this is the International Directors of Reasonable Faith, Dr. William Lane Craig's organization, is represented all over the world by 200 plus men and women who are in your communities, and they are available to help you process through the intersection between faith and non-faith issues. And so what this is, something that we are offering on behalf of that organization, is kind of a monthly study on some of the top issues highlighted in a book that was published about 15 years ago called Blackwell's. Okay. Chapter 9 was written by this man that you see in front of you on religious experience. Professor, I think, first of all, that was a marvelous recap. If I can say something strong, up until your research, I had never considered moving ARE closer to the central part of my own doctrine. So what I mean is, whenever I'm invited, so like next month, my alma mater wants me, one of the clubs at my alma mater wants me to come and speak on some things. That's great. And typically I do that epistemologically. I do that morally. I bring in ethics, right? And then I build from there. But I've never considered AREs before. And I remember sitting with your material, listening to you speak, and just processing this for some time now. And I think somehow I've missed how powerful this is. And I don't know, Charles, if you feel the same way.
I do.
But like what Swinburne has done has taken millennia, like pre-scholastic literature, right? Like before we had all these robust arguments for cosmology and cosmogony, before we had all these robust arguments for quantum space and things, all we had was ARE. I mean, I feel like when Aquinas talked about the theory of the church, it's because they were pressing him to give them something that sounded more scholarly rather than just visions, you know? And I think that for him to say, no, there's meat here, it's a game changer. Charles, I want to open some space for you.
Yeah, when I was listening to your presentation, as I've read through the chapter, obviously David Hume is what most people punt to in some type of miraculous claim or religious experience claim. And what I think was key here, or at least for me, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, is that Hume's, the quote people generally give of Hume is, no testimony is sufficient to establish a miraculous claim. I'm paraphrasing. That is really an attack on the principle of testimony, if I'm understanding you correctly, which poses a problem in circularity, is what you were trying to get at earlier, I think, if I understand you correctly.
No, can I join you here? Now, I just want to clarify the David Hume's objection. Now, David Hume's objection, in fact, accepts the principle of testimony. Now, but that his argument is that by definition, miracle is a counter instance, an exception to the natural law, and then natural law should be uniformly attested by our common testimonies. So it is always the case that the testimony for the regularity of common people will always outweigh the abnormal testimony for miracles. That is his argument. So in fact, he also needs to appeal to testimony, but he uses his idea of natural law to suggest this argument. But I think the loophole of his argument is that natural law, in fact, is supported by our past uniform experience. And for example, people in living on the equator may have never seen ice. So for them, their uniform experience is that water always appears in a liquid form. So they distrust other experiences that, there could be ice. So in fact, I think Swinburne has also written a very good book on the concept of miracle. He argues that if we correctly utilize all these principles of experience and testimony, in fact, given that some experiences, some evidence is strong for these experiences, for miracles, there can be a rational case for miracles. And in fact, Swinburne does provide this argument for the resurrection of Christ. He wrote a book on the resurrection of God the Son incarnate, and I think these two books are really gems. They really defend the major Christian miracle of resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, but then I want to come back to ARE. In fact, the ARE does not need to argue with him on the issue of miracles, because people sometimes say that religious experiences are abnormal. Now, but that is not true. Now, in fact, as I have said in my chapter, I have also produced evidence that in fact, theistic experiences are widespread throughout history and throughout the different cultures. Now, in fact, you are American, and I'm Asian and Chinese. In fact, nowadays we have maybe 50 millions of Christians in China, and many of us also have similar experiences of God and Jesus Christ, of rebirth, etc. Now, so in fact, we go back, as I said, to medieval, the time of Augustine. In fact, we can see very similar experiences of God happening again and again. Now, so why should we say it is abnormal? Now, although of course it may not. Now, I have not the data, but even if it's not a majority, but sometimes experiences do not need to be the majority experience before we call it normal. For example, some people have a musical ear. A conductor in the orchestra can distinguish the sounds from different instruments. I couldn't do that. I can never do that. But I cannot deny the capacity, this experiential capacity of that conductor. There may be just a minority of people who can do it, but still it is normal. Now, so, and then the happening of religious experiences do not contradict natural laws. So I think we can leave aside the debate about miracles when we discuss the ARE.
Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that.
I don't know how to formally ask this, Professor, but at this stage, and for the sake of time, I want to be mindful. I am considering drastically editing some of my own materials on the basis of some recent research, yours included in that. And when I do, I may even formulate a new argument for one of my presentations that incorporates some of the things you talked about today. Would that be okay if I sent that to you once that was done, for you to look over that?
Surely, no problem. I would love to have more interaction and dialogue.
Yeah, just because like I said, I don't think there's any easy way to say this, but I personally believe that this is like a really, I think more people need to discuss this. I think more people need to understand this material. I think more people need to interact with this material. I think that miracles get a bad rap. I think that many people in church are confused about experience. They're ashamed to share their faith because of a lack of understanding in this case. And so I think making this more accessible is just going to be just a ground shaker. So I want to give you the final minute, Professor. Did you have any current research you wanted to share with us, or any concluding thoughts before we end the recording this evening?
No, I think as you have talked about using my materials, I think when you use it for the popular people, I think one important point is to show that now this trust is not an unconditional trust. We do look for relative defeaters. Now, so in case that there are some religious fanatics who advocate that I kill because God told me to do so, I think these are against our ethical principles, against our ethical moral experiences, against the religious experiences of most Christians who experience God as a loving God. Now, so when I say we should give initial trust to experiences, religious experiences, we do need to remind that there are some pathological cases of religious experiences which we can discount, and especially those religious experiences which are used for selfish purposes, etc. Now, so I think the idea is that on one point is that we need to counter the cultural bias against religious experiences, because nowadays people are so much influenced by positivism and scientism, and they always think that only sense experiences are reliable. And then so they will always challenge you. Okay, I grant that you have those experiences, but how come you know that your experience is real? My challenge is to turn the table against them. Okay, come on. You remember, you claim you remember something, see something. Can you prove your experiences non-circularly? No, not at all. You have to trust it and then test it with other experiences, etc. So this is not special pleading for religious experiences. It is just adopting the same example. But then we need to correct the exaggeration of some use of this principle, that we can trust all religious experiences, because from our past experiences, we do know that some religious people can be crazy or fanatical, can be divisive, they may just be hallucinations. So what we take to be the most reliable experiences are those experiences of God which are testified by the saints and ordinary believers throughout ages, throughout cultures, and then they are also supported in the Bible, especially by the teachings of Jesus. So I think those are the core of religious experiences I defend. So I do not defend all and every religious experiences. So I think that's important. And then I think by looking at those cases, in fact, my recent research is on the cognitive science of religion. Some people think that religious experiences exist and they develop as a kind of evolutionary adaptive strategy, and etc. So I cannot explain the details, but I want to show that the current cognitive science of religion explanations are also not very good. And even if they are true, they also do not tend to show that religious experiences are unreliable. So I think this is my recent research direction. In fact, there's a kind of completion of my past project, because in my past project, I've dealt with most objections, especially my dealing of the conflicting claims objection, I would say, is the most detailed response to that objection so far in contemporary philosophy of religion. And up till now, I have seen no one to criticize my response to that. So I don't know whether maybe they just ignore my work, or maybe I also done some maybe worthwhile response here. But I do think currently people listen about the God module in the brain. There's a neuroscientist called Eugene Query. Now, in fact, he's not an atheist. Even some neuroscientists have some research on the neural basis of religious experiences. In fact, many of them conclude that neuroscience in itself does not overturn religious experiences. So I just want to convey to you all these recent developments in this ARE. Yeah.
I think that's amazing how you took, because the paper you cited was from 1979, right? So I mean, if you go back 1970, we're talking 51 years of information that you synthesized into a very good presentation about why subjective experience cannot just be so readily discounted, and you specify with great specification what we mean when we talk there. And then you then posited a standard for that same experience and said, well, no, there's guardrails here. We're not just letting everything through, right? We still have so even in this realm that many people consider purely subjective, not only has there now been this validity gained, but there's still a transcendence here. There's still guardrails here. There's still defeaters here. I just think that's marvelous because I think this has been seen as the exception to all of those things for so long, and maybe just in the laity. But anyway, for the sake of time, Charles, if you could help me just thank the professor for just such a fantastic presentation. This recording will be available. Charles will send you a card, professor, but it will be available as our other recordings have to all of our directors and followers around the world. And with that, I want to thank you guys all for joining us today. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
No, thank you for having me.